Hello and welcome to Asia Gaming Brief's podcast series. Today I'm talking with Jennifer Song, who is an analyst with Morningstar based in Shenzhen. We're going to be discussing the outlook for Macau and how it differs from expectations at the beginning of the year. We're also going to be discussing China's outbound tourism policies.
Thanks again for agreeing to this, Jennifer. It's great to have you back. I think last time we spoke was probably about 6 months ago. And just wondering now how the recovery or lack thereof in Macau is playing out compared with your expectations at the beginning of the year.
That's definitely below expectations. So the first 2 months of GDR data was still good and well on track, but the number fell sharply since March due to the outbreaks and city lockdowns in mainland China. So the daily GGR in April fell further to 89 million. That's the lowest level since October 2020. So overall numbers were below our expectations.
And what are you expecting for the rest of the year? Do you see more of the same, or do you think this could actually pick up?
We actually think second quarter will remain very weak. So we have reduced our full year GGR forecast from 45% of pre-pandemic level in 2022 to 30 to 35% of the 2019's level over the past reporting season. And we currently expect the Q2 GGR to fall to 16% of the 2019's level compared to 23% in the first quarter. So we still expect some recoveries from the mid of the year, given we're taking some hope on the upcoming summer holiday and further rebound in first quarter. And we think the rebound of traffic to Macau during the May holiday, that probably is a signal for pent-up demand.
It's a signal for pent-up demand. Do you see any signs at all that border may reopen with Hong Kong anytime soon?
We would expect some minor lift of the quarantine policy, and the recent news of China's border policy also suggests a minor easing of the quarantine measures. For example, the quarantine days were reduced to 10 plus 7. That means 10 days centralized quarantine plus 7 days self-monitoring for the overseas travelers in some cities, for example, like Beijing. And originally, the quarantine days were 14 days centralized quarantine plus 7-day home quarantine. So the overall days were reduced already. So we expect some like a minor lift of Hong Kong border to Macau at a similar manner, but we don't expect any material change of the border policy and the China's zero COVID strategy before the 20th National Congress, which is likely around the late October or early November.
Right. And of course, quite aside from COVID, there seems to be mounting evidence that China is stopping gaming customers from visiting Macau. Are you hearing that where you are?
Yes, from policy side, we see news that China temporarily suspended the overseas traveling, but actually that's not the first time that China has mentioned that policy. We see similar policy on the provincial level over the past 2 or 3 years, but this time is more official. According to the past practice, we actually see the Zhuhai government has excluded Macau from overseas traveling.
So that means that anybody who wants to go to Macau, they cannot go to Macau.
So from the policy side, they still can go to Macau, but we see some near-term impact is for the air traveling, as some cities have canceled the direct flight to Macau. And air traveler generally contribute higher GGR because they will stay for more nights. So that have some impact to the overall traffic to Macau.
Do you think those flight cancellations, is that because of COVID, or do you think it's because of this policy that they don't want people going to Macau to gamble?
I think that's the flight canceling, that's more related to COVID policy. But from the other side, and gambling, cross-border gambling, we actually received some feedback from some like a VIP and the premium mass client from last year. They were received the government warning for the overseas gambling since beginning of last year. So those VIP and the premium mass and even some business traveler have maintained very low profile for reduce the traveler to Macau.
And how big a problem is this for Macau, do you think, for the future, even when COVID goes away?
For the VIP side, that definitely has a big trouble to Macau. So that's why the Macau government has thinking to diversify the customer base. But another thing is for the casino operator, because premium client and VIP client, they generally generate lower EBITDA margin, which is about just 10%, but mass market generates 25 to 35% of EBITDA margin. That's much higher. So growing mass market is likely to offset the negative news for the casino operators bottom line. But in the coming like 2 or 3 years before Macau have a fully recover, I think the impact should be still there.
Okay. And you just mentioned that the operators are trying to diversify their tourism base. How realistic do you think that is, given that the focus has been on mainland China for so long?
Actually, from the policy side, we see that news just signals Macau government wants to support the sector. That is good for the sector because the government, although they may have some preconditions, but they may have some commitment for a cut of gaming tax. That will definitely help to boost the bottom line. But on the practical side, we think there are some 3 difficulties. The first one is Macau's border policy need to be consistent with mainland China. So that means before a full recover from the COVID, we don't think the border policy will totally easing. So that's a big problem for Macau. And secondly, even if Macau can ease the border policy, the overall overseas traveler that contributes a very small percentage to Macau. Just take 2019's number as an example. There are 71% traffic from mainland China and 19% from Hong Kong, 3% from Taiwan. And the overseas traffic only makes like 7 to 8% of the total tourism traffic. And the largest one is Korea, South Korea, that makes 2%. That's a very, very small number compared with the mainland traveler. So that's a big problem for them. And thirdly, because Macau has a very small land space, it's just like 5% of that of Singapore. So we think the regional competition will remain high, and it's very difficult for Macau to attract those overseas gamblers.
It is a very interesting conundrum for Macau. I mean, how strict do you think Beijing will be? Do you think that this will drop off in a few years' time and they won't be so concerned about Chinese visiting Macau to gamble, or do you think this policy is here to stay?
We think some policy will stay, especially for the high rollers, and because the government is concerning about the cross-border money flight. Yeah.
Back to the revenue in Macau. If this continues, as you believe it's going to, are any of the operators likely to face serious problems?
Definitely, SGM face a greater challenge because the company has some liquidity issue at the moment, and is a cash on hand can only survive for a couple of months for operation for this company. But the company has secured some shareholder loan, so we think the overall default risk is low, but the company will still under pressure for its liquidity issue until it can refinance its outstanding debt.
Can you see, do you think that there could be any mergers and acquisitions amongst the operators?
We don't think so, because the near-term visibility of Macau is quite low, and we don't think anyone wants to take over others.
Right, okay. And do you still think that the 6 existing operators will be the ones who get the licenses, or do you think there's any room for surprises?
I think they will still go for the license renewal, because this gambler has stayed here for 3 years since beginning of the COVID outbreaks. So they already spent too much. I think they will go for the license renewal. And from analyst meeting with those management, they're still keen for renew their license.
Well, thank you very much for joining us today, Jennifer. That's great stuff, great insights into Macau and the Chinese policy.
Thank you for joining us today. You've been listening to Jennifer Song, who is an analyst at Morningstar.